Hello, everybody. Come on in. It's nice to see you, or at least to see your names in white letters in black rectangles. Welcome to the Wednesday afternoon Brooklyn Rail reading series. Today is let me find it here, 712th episode of the new social environment, and I think it's the number's not on the page. It's the 115th, somewhere between 112 and 115th Wednesday reading. And we're going to have today a solo reading by Ron Padgett. And then Ron and I are going to chat a little bit. And Ron may answer a couple questions if I don't say stupid things that send him screaming off into the Vermont countryside. My name's Anselm Berrigan. I host this series and the poetry editor of the Brooklyn Rail. And please pay attention to the chat and you'll get some information on Ron's various endeavors. He's got a book that's just out that I think he'll be reading from called Dot from Coffee House Press. Recent books include How Long, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and his collected poems won the LA Times Prize for the Best Poetry Book of 2014. He also got a William Carlos Williams Award for that book and received the Frost Medal. His translations include Zone, the selected poems of Guillaume Apollinaire and Blaise Cendrars' complete poems. He's also the author of a number of books of prose, including memoirs of Joe Brainerd and also the book Oklahoma Tough, which is about his father. And Ron was also worked at Teachers and Writers Collaborative for a long time and edited a number of terrific books on the subjects of teaching in various ways to children in public schools. And Ron is fabulous. And I don't need to say anything else. Please welcome Ron Padgett.
Thank you, Anselm. You're kind of great yourself, actually. Yeah, I'm going to read some poems for maybe 25 or 30 minutes from this book here called Dot from the good people at Coffee House Press. And I'm just going to read them one after the other. I don't know if I'll talk or what about them. We'll see. Yeah. Tea for you, too. My friends, I want to tell you that in general, things are all right with me, relatively speaking. Just a second. Here's Einstein asking where the tea is. I reassure him it will be ready soon, relatively speaking. And he shuffles back to the room that holds him, with plenty of space for that cup of tea, even though the cup is 12 feet in diameter, about the same size as my thinking of you this morning. That was one of those COVID lockdown poems. Presto. Remember the guy who sold magic tricks in a small shop next door to not much of anything? Of course you don't. He made you disappear. Over there. I have always assumed that my body would provide reliable transportation to carry me through the day. And no, I will not extend that metaphor. And if you know what that means, you'll know what I mean. John Ashbery once said, I never get up before the crack of noon. Pope Francis said, I am Argentinian, You know how an Argentinian commits suicide? He climbs up on top of his ego and jumps off. That's all, Bruno, Fairfield Porter said to his dog. Does it help to know that Bruno was a golden retriever and that Fairfield was invisible all of a sudden? This next thing is prose. And like prose, it goes on a little bit. It's called Start, and it begins with an epigraph from Cole Porter. Each time I do, just the thought of you makes me stop before I begin. I want to do something, but I don't know what. Save my country? Of course, but that's impossible. Be young, or at least forget about my decrepit, sick, and dying friends? That sounds good, the being young part. Or sell all my possessions and go live in a, what, an igloo? I've never quite accepted the idea that human beings live or lived in igloos. Since childhood, I've thought that the last place I'd want to be in a severely cold climate is inside a hut made of all things of ice. Okay, let's assume there were no materials with which to build a warmer shelter. But why didn't they migrate south where they could find some trees or mud? Why did the Eskimo man arrive on a sheet of ice and say to his female companion, "Honey, this looks like a good place to settle down"? In 1967, I arrived in a trashed apartment in a slum and said to my wife, "Honey, this looks like a good place to live." She was not an Eskimo, but she grunted and went to work cleaning the kitchen. But I'm not interested in the past. I'm just mildly obsessed with it, fearing that if I let go of it, I will float off into some endless psychic space. And besides, how much of a future could there be? And who would I be in it? A sack of bones being shifted in a nursing home bed, but listening to Bach. Or perhaps an old gent being helped off an airliner by an attractive young woman provided by the Ministry of Culture, on my way to give a reading of my poems on French national television. But am I supposed to read them in French or in English? It's a moot point because I have lost the satchel that contained the poems, left it where? Perhaps I can phone the airport or the taxi company in New York, but I don't have a telephone. And the young woman, where'd she go? She's gone back to China, to the land of her birth, where her village awaits her in the year 1736, cook smoke rising from the huts and thinning out into the evening air. It's like what I was saying to an old friend today. Many writers our age wish they had been in Paris in the early part of the 20th century. And some younger writers today wish they had been in New York in the 1960s. And the really young ones wish they had been here in the 1990s. The measurement keeps sliding forward. It would be wonderful to, I was about to say wonderful to find oneself walking down the street in ancient Athens. Kalimera, Socrates. But I chastised myself for having this banal thought. And then I realized that what was not banal was the full vision I had of momentarily being there among those strange creatures, the Athenians, for that one hallucinatory moment, and how it happened so quickly, I didn't have time to be terrified by its otherness. A few years before my grandmother, 1900 to 1998, a few years before she died, She told me how clearly she recalled being 8 years old, atop a horse and wearing a pretty dress with blue ribbons, riding from the farm into town, Springdale, Arkansas, on a nice Saturday morning. And as she said this, I wished I had been the horse or a tree or the road so that I could have been in that moment with her. So beautiful it was. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear, intoned the voice of the man who led us into another episode of the adventures of that peculiar cowboy, the Lone Ranger, who, it turned out, was not so lone, being accompanied by his faithful sidekick, Tonto. We do not know that tonto in Spanish means stupid. So we are innocently swept into the black and white world on the screen, a world of dust and sunlight and decent, hardworking homesteaders rescued from brutality and injustice by the Lone Ranger, who asks nothing in return, who in fact, at the end, simply rides off into the distance, going where? To his next adventure, perhaps. Certainly not to lie down and sleep or do anything ordinary, such as launder his mask. And though the people he saved always wonder, who was that masked man? We do not share their curiosity, for we know that he is the Lone Ranger, and that explains everything. I would like to be in Paris with the Lone Ranger, walking down the Boulevard Saint-Germain in 1920, even though passersby might think he is the clever arch-criminal Fantomas in a cowboy costume. But the Lone Ranger and Fantomas no longer exist the way they once did, just like the boulevard and all of Paris itself. Every time I return to that beautiful city, I walk down the streets I knew 52 years ago, searching for them, even though they are there. But what I'm looking for is the feeling of being in those streets back then. And of course, that feeling is long gone, as if it too wore a mask and had disappeared over the horizon in a cloud of dust. Back to poetry. Bubble. It's a very great pleasure to walk with you in November. Our bodies sleepy in the clarity falling across the city, and to feel a kiss arrive from a height of 5'2" and new shadows on my shirt, rising and falling as I live and breathe with you. Free at last. There must have been some magic in that old silk hat they found, for when they placed it on his head, he began to dance around. He being God, the Christian God, who in the Bible was so grumpy and now is without a care in the world. This next poem is called I'll Get It. It's a sequence of about 13 short poems. I think they're 13. We'll find out. I'm not going to read the numbers between them. They don't have titles. I'll just give a significant, meaningful pause. I'll get it. It's quite satisfying to have a key ring with a bunch of keys on it, and to pick the right one and put it in a lock and turn it till it goes click. Locking up is clunk. Yesterday, my mother would have been 96, but she wasn't. I tried to get her there, but she wouldn't budge. She's stuck at 75, younger than me. I've arranged the books by genre, but now I also have the urge to put labels on the shelves: poetry, fiction, etc. Etc. for those books that leap down off the shelves because they don't want to be in a category. I jump up and jump around the room, boing, 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 but I can't catch them. Walking across the lawn, I was trapped in the figure of a man walking across the lawn, and I couldn't get out. And in some funny way, I didn't want to. Though being a human is probably not the best thing to be. What is? You know, everything. There's a portrait of a Chinese emperor who looks ugly. I mean, really ugly. In fact, so ugly that all I can think is that in his day, he wasn't considered ugly, or else the artist would have been chopped up and fed to the royal pigs. Emperor, they squeal, give us the artist. But he will not, for the portrait has made him handsome for all time. At 16, I decided to be a poet forever. And now, 61 years later, I stop writing and slap my ear. But the wily mosquito zooms off in a blur of sound. At birth, he was a mosquito, but in a day or two, he'll wish he had been a poet, even one like me, ear throbbing. I like the way the hair on the back of my hand looks when it's gold against tan skin. But when it's brown against white, it looks ugly as sin. When sin is ugly, which it always is, according to some people. As beautiful as sin would wreck our moral system, or what's left of it, well, I guess we'd better leave that alone, as is, alas. Remember those motorcycle daredevils who rode on the walls inside a drum 50 feet in diameter, parallel to the ground? You don't? Well, okay. The phone rang and I called out, I'll get it. But there was no one in the house except me. I saved my wife from answering the phone, though she wasn't there. That's how much I love her, or am a nut. In Tai Chi class, someone mentioned Taoist Tai Chi, and I thought, ooh, that sounds really good. This is the thought of someone who needs to lie down like 100 people in the high mountains where the air is all mirth. The view through my window never looked like this. Red, orange, and light green leaves jumping in random jumps as raindrops spatter them one at a time. All of it blocking the view up the path into the woods, like the ringing in my ears I didn't notice until just now. In the 1,136 pages of War and Peace, there is only one comic passage late in the book when Tolstoy summarizes the Napoleonic Wars, and he says, he conquered everyone everywhere. That is, he killed a great many people because he was a very great genius. And for some reason, he went to kill the Africans. And he killed them so well and was so cunning and clever that on returning to France, he bade everyone obey him. And they all did obey him. After being made emperor, he went to kill people in Italy, Austria, and Prussia. And there he killed a great many. The passage continues in this vein, like writing in a children's book, then switches back to serious. What made Tolstoy use this comic tone? Napoleon wasn't funny, he was horrible. And the French erected a huge monument to house his coffin, inside of which they placed that little piece of shit. This says the asters wave their heads. The flower aster, not the aster family of people. This is the ASTERs. The asters wave their heads and say, sorry to be so late, but we got held up by the weather, which caused a big traffic jam. And all those daffodils, peonies, and daylilies ahead of us, just lolling around and taking up space. We cut them and bring them inside and put them in a vase, and they just stand there like startled exclamation points whose heads are exploding as if they were flowers. And the last one in this sequence. Lee Crabtree came to my apartment and sat on the floor. He said he didn't need a chair. We talked about what? And then he gave me the sheet music for a song he said we wrote. Then he left. The next I heard, he waved to someone straight across from him, high in an office window, and jumped. What, 40 years ago? It's hard to believe this isn't a story I made up. Lee just jumped. And here's a little prose piece. I don't know why I'm so fond of this piece, but I like it. Anyway, it's called Esther's Notebook. On the reverse side of the page that carries Les Cahiers d'Esther, these days, the only comic strip I read, are real estate ads that remind me of the life I was never able to give my wife. Here's one for a cream-colored house in Paris, in the 7th arrondissement, in its own private alley off the Rue de Grenelle, an 18th century gym with 13 rooms, 6 bedrooms on 4 levels, near shops and excellent schools. The kind of property that rarely comes onto the market. About $6 million. And a private parking area. On the reverse side of the page, Esther is 13, learning how to deal with the world. Lunch bucket. How corny and sentimental it is to remember the lunch bucket my grandfather took to work. Black metal with a vaulted lid hinged to the rectangular box, inside of which was a thermos of coffee and a sandwich and maybe a hard-boiled egg. He himself was anything but hard-boiled, just a regular guy, though kinder than most and gentler. I see him in the big metal shed among the metal pipes and grinders, with the dim light filtering in as he sits down next to Gomez, the new guy some people call a wetback, whose English made my grandpa laugh. And he opens the lunchbox, unscrews the plastic thermos cap, and pours the coffee into it. He was glad to have a job, and he liked Gomez. Peppermint air. Only 20 minutes and I already don't smell the peppermint oil on the cotton balls I have placed in this room to keep the mice out. I sit here in a cube of air, a big non-mouse. And I lose track of time. Oh, we're not too bad. This is a little bit long and cuckoo poem. It's called, yeah, maybe I'll end with this one. Yeah. It's called Knockouts. Excuse me, Knockouts. And it has an epigraph from the Apollinaire. It's in French. And I think I explained, ça a l'air de rimer. It can mean either that seems to rhyme or that seems to make sense, either one. Ça a l'air de rimer, Apollinaire, Knockouts. Do you speak English? I don't speak Russian. I am a great poet. I am a great tennis player. Where is the bathroom? The Chinese word for something is Tongxi, made up of two characters, Tong meaning west and Xi meaning east. That seems to make sense. When you scratch your head, your fingers curl up like a question mark. So he said, let's run and have some fun before I melt away. Without legs, run? Like Burnham Wood to Dunsinane, eh? That seems to rhyme, eh? Long ago, I made the mistake of thinking that life is mysterious. Life is not mysterious. It is mysterious only to those who think about it too much. Peasants don't think that life is mysterious. They are too busy staying alive. There is some word that feels like it should have a J in it, but I can't remember what it is. Not picaresque, as in Don Quixote, no, or babushka. A monkey jumped on a buzzard's back. Sticks spinning in the air like evil. And that movie theater in Paris, what was it? Oriental, kind of like a cross between a xylophone and a pyramid. And on the Rue de Grenelle, wasn't it? I lay in bed in its green jade embrace. La Pagode, of course, Rue de Babylone. Look, I can't do anything about it. It being like Nevada or vanishing or let the devil take tomorrow. For it doesn't matter what you think, but why you think it. And it took me a while, but now I'm inside your face, and I won't leave until I feel like it, friend. And I don't mind giving you the creeps. In fact, I kind of like being made of snow. A young woman with pink hair starts across the street as if she were someone else. The hair varies so what, but it rides across the street, a pink cloud on its own. So, not so what. Electricity is like the nervous system, branching and buzzing inside that pink hair that is still riding inside my pink head. I am a pink snowman. And you don't believe me because you don't have pink anything. In Syria, some children have red hair, red with blood, that is. Let's put them all in a box and fold it so it vanishes, just like they did. Boom, 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 as the song says. You knocks me out. like Nevada. So when I wake up, the first thing I do is nothing. I just lie there, saturated with myself. Then I knock myself out. And from all over my body, little points of light float out into the room. Boom, 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 boom. Voila, as they say somewhere. Those are the poems I felt like reading. I can't hear any of you. It's awful. Like the thunderous applause. Anyway, Anselm, do you want to ask me some things?
Yeah, there was lots of applause, but yeah, it was all in everybody else's rooms. Thank you, Ron, and thank you for being willing to come on and read for us today. I guess I want to ask you about knockouts and the other long poem, The Sequence, that you read. So I'm just sort of curious how the sequence becomes a sequence, whereas knockouts, for those of you who couldn't see it, is in lines and stanzas and is changing rapidly as you're reading it and bringing things back at times to make certain circles. And I'm just curious if there's any particular thing that happens that makes one be numbered on separate pages and one continue to flow down the page for several pages.
Yeah, there's an easy answer for that. The one that has the number has different numbers and are discrete little units were written at different times and under different circumstances. And I thought some of them were okay as standalones. But first of all, I didn't want to give them any titles, and I like poems with titles pretty much, but it occurred to me that I could arrange them in a sequence that might interest me, and so I did. It's almost like, well, Joe Brainerd, for instance, would sometimes do little drawings, and then he would put them all together in a grid. And so it was something like that. So it's a bit of a collage poem, but I made all the pieces for the collage. Nothing is found in there. So that was it. I wanted to glue together these pieces, so to speak, and make a group. The other poem, as you say, sort of it goes from start to finish, and although it jumps around a lot, the way the sequence does, the earlier sequence I mentioned, it jumps around inside itself. And it keeps jumping back and forth in all kinds of ways. But does that answer your question? It's
yeah, no, thank you, and that makes perfect sense, actually. And I mean, I'm really interested in something that comes up in a poem that's in dot that that you didn't read, actually. But it's a poem where you come to a point and you're writing about the Coleridge poem, This Lime Tree Bower, My Prison. And you know from the preamble that he's sitting in his lime tree bower and he's writing the poem, and what's happening in the poem is happening in front of him, and there's a bird that streaks by, and you say that that's the first time that something like that may have happened in a poem. And I was thinking about that before I actually got to the poem while reading the book, because something else happened that made me wonder, and I can't remember what it is right this second, but I thought, oh, I wonder if that happened right as Ron was writing. And then I knew about the Coleridge anecdote because you, I think, mentioned it in an interview once, and it sort of stayed with me. And I guess I'm just sort of curious, in this group of poems, does this kind of thing happen often where you're writing, and I imagine you're writing pretty regularly, daily, and sometimes things that are right around you are just getting into the writing as the writing's happening, and Other times you're catching yourself thinking about something that happened that morning or the day before?
Yeah, the answer is yes. But I can't remember the first time I put something in a poem because it was happening at the moment of writing the poem, at that very moment. But it was probably as early as, I think, 1964, maybe. I was listening to some music, and it was a Woody Guthrie song called "The Reuben James," about a ship that got sunk. And there's a line, "Tonight she's in her grave at the bottom of the sea." And as I was writing the poem, I heard Woody Guthrie say that over my shoulder, and it seemed to fit so well into that spot of the poem that I said, okay, it should go in there. So it's a question of not only just the idea of immediacy, what goes in a poem, what doesn't, as you're composing it. And some words seem to arrive from inside you, and sometimes they arrive from outside. Or it's not a sound, not a word, it's a sound, a siren of an ambulance going by or something, or whatever, a dog barking. In fact, I have a poem in which a dog barks because the dog was barking at that moment. I don't think there's anything particularly extraordinary about that, but it was extraordinary when Coleridge wrote that poem, because to my knowledge, no one had ever done that before, had ever recorded an immediate happening in the poem as it was being written, or at least given that impression that they did. Who knows? But the impulse to include those things came from a number of sources, a number of influences. But I think one of them was probably Frank O'Hara, reading Frank O'Hara's quick, another poem before I go off my rocker, that sort of thing, or Rachmaninoff's on the radio, that sort of, including the immediate experience. I think Frank O'Hara's influence probably was pretty strong there.
Right. When you were writing the poem where you say something like, "I'm a man on the lawn, and now I'm trapped inside being a man on the lawn."
Yeah.
Were you writing standing on the lawn?
No, I just walked across the lawn a few minutes before writing that poem. Yeah. And
Okay.
that impression of being trapped inside being trapped inside a man walking across the lawn, that impression, that feeling was still with me, actually. I mean, I wasn't feeling trapped anymore, but maybe trapped's not quite the right word, but I guess it is. Okay. By then I was not trapped inside a man walking across the lawn. I because I'd stopped walking across the lawn.
Right.
It sounds cuckoo.
Well,
It's a little bit like something Kenneth Cook was reported to have said to someone who was interviewing him, and Kenneth said something like, "I just realized that for anything to happen, it has to happen within a certain allotted time." It's a very funny idea, you take time and space and you disconnect them and then you put them back together. It's a very strange way of seeing the world, but
right.
it's a little bit like being trapped inside this figure, this man, and then not being trapped. Anyway, let's go on to the next question. I'm going to beat that to death.
Well, I think part of the reason I wanted to bring that up was just that it just struck me reading this particular book, but I think this is, happens in a lot of the poems of yours that I've read, that I have this sense of the present always being the place, or almost always being the place where the poem starts. And even when you're going into a memory space, remembering an old friend or a family member, as often happens in these poems, that act of remembering in the present always feels palpable to me, like I'm in the past with you, but I'm in the present with you, remembering. And I guess I wonder if that is gibberish or not.
No, it's not gibberish at all, but it doesn't sound like a question though, really. But I know what you mean. And Well, thank you. I mean, I'm glad you read them and feel that way. That's nice. Nice to know that. Um, I don't intend that to happen, but I'm not sure what I intend to happen. Actually, I often don't intend for anything to happen when I'm writing, these days anyway. I mean, the days are long gone in which I would worry about or be obsessed with a line break as I'm writing. You know, I mean, it's okay. You can be obsessed about it later, but not while writing.
Does this particular group feel, does it feel different to you in terms of, I mean, I imagine these are poems from mostly from the last few years, and some have been written in isolation. And do you have you know what, that's not even the way I want to ask. You have a lot of books that are poems with individual titles, discrete poems. And there's always, for me, this question of how you organize them. One time I actually even, long time ago, I was trying to figure out how to make a group of poems go together in a manuscript, and I decided I was going to read the first line in the first poem of a bunch of your books. And I opened up one of them, and the first poem I think was Ode to Stupidity, and the first line was duh, Then I realized I didn't have to think so hard about it.
Yes, yeah, I'm afraid I do give people license to be stupid. So above all, myself.
I have a couple of questions from the peanut gallery, not this group here, but a personal peanut gallery. And let's see, Zach Reverdy Wallard asks, who are the poets that you read and return to most often, and why?
Well, first of all, why? I can never, I don't know. Well, you know, I shy away from answering list questions like that, because later I realized, oh, I forgot so-and-so. Oh, I should have mentioned so-and-so. Oh my God. You know, I always agonize later over the incompleteness of my answer. But by return to, do you mean read them or think about them? I mean, or both?
I think he probably means both, and I think he's not as interested in the why as in just that process of going.
And any answer I give for the why would be spurious anyway. But well, let me just put it this way. I'll make it more specific, and this is an answerable version of that question. Is recently I've been thinking about John Donne a lot. I haven't actually picked up his poems and read them yet, because I want to think about them more, about early versus late poems, and then also in relation to his sermons. So Donne has been on my mind a lot. Dick Gallup has been on my mind a lot lately. You know, he's a poet friend of mine who died a few years ago. You know, I've lost track of when he died, even. It's so strange. But I've written a memoir of him, and well, I'll say to people listening, you, Anselm, are editing his collected poems. So Dick has really been on my mind a lot lately, in his work too. And how mysterious and beautiful it is, and how it keeps revealing layers and layers of tone and depth and definition that I missed when I was younger. It's really so. I mean, those are two very serious poets. I pick up Kenneth Coke's books because I keep them handy, so I can pick them up easily, and I reread them often and dazzled in one way or another again. O'Hara, I mean, New York School guys, Kenward Elmsley, for example, whose work is, again, like Dick's, is now revealing itself to me, let's put it that way, in ways I had never saw before. How autobiographical his work is, and you have to get through the pyrotechnics and the incredible verbal fireworks, the wittiness you get, you sort of just take a little slower look and you find the real Kenward Elmsley. It's really quite fascinating. Those are a couple, but
Yeah.
Recently, like during the lockdown, I came up here to Vermont to hide away with my wife from COVID, and so I had a lot of time up here, and so I read the Canterbury Tales in Middle English, for God's sake. I plowed my way through it, and what a great experience that was. Challenging, but really great. So those are just a few of the names I'm going to throw out now.
Yeah. And you mentioned when we were just sort of doing the tech check before the reading started that there's a book of letters between Kenward and Lucia Berlin that's just come out.
Yes, I'm glad you made a segue there. I'm going to hold it up because it's a really wonderful book. Kenward became friends with Lucia Berlin, the fiction writer, and they struck up this pen pal relationship afterwards. And this book has just come out from University of New Mexico Press. It's really fascinating. Not just, I mean, I knew Kenward well. I never met Lucia, but I'm meeting her and falling in love with her because of this book. It's really, thank you, Anselm, for mentioning that.
Well, I guess it's been on my mind lately that, yeah, you're working on the memoir on Dick Gallup, and I'm working with his poems to make that collected poems manuscript, and this big monograph that with a John Yow's essay on and tons of great pictures of Joe Brainerd's work has just come out from Rizzoli. Your book is out. My father's prose book is out, and it's sort of amazing to have all of these things kind of happening at the same time. But I feel like across, I think of the four of you separately, but I think of you together in different at times, and you're all very different in the works. But I feel like friendship is a binding subject or fact of reality that spreads itself out across all four of your works, bodies of work in different ways. And maybe again, that's something that's less to be thought about and more just about the fact that you put people that you know into your poems. But that's also not a question, I guess. I can put a question mark at the end of it, but it seems significant.
If I give an answer, it will sound like a question. But just briefly, I will say that some of you listening in now know that Joe Brainerd and Dick Gallup and I and Ted Berrigan all met in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the 1950s. Joe and I were in the same first grade class together, and we became really good friends in high school. And Dick Gallup lived across the street from me from the time I was 8 or 9 years old. And then I met Ted when I was a junior in high school. He was a student at the University of Tulsa. I met him in a bookstore I was working in. But the four of us became friends, good friends, and we all kind of migrated to New York and mainly in late 1960. We knew almost no one in New York, and so we had each other. We were this band of Okies. Also, Ted Berrigan's girlfriend at the time, Pat Mitchell, came, and she was a very important part. She was like the person who kept us from all going insane and freaking out and everything. And so there were five of us. We had this band. It was like the four Marx Brothers plus this one sane person to help keep us somewhat in shape. And there were those earlier years in which Joe and Ted had very difficult time economically, financially, and there we were writing this insane poetry and showing it mainly to just each other, and it formed this indissoluble bond among us. And that no matter how many times we would get pissed off at each other, argue, or I'm never going, Joe writing, I hate Ted Berrigan across the wall of his apartment, things like that. All that stuff didn't matter. It was the normal course of artistic friendships. And we, as I said, we had this indissoluble bond. It's never been broken. And to me, and at certain times, like Ted and I wrote poems, a lot of poems together, and you can't tell who wrote what line. In fact, we couldn't later remember who wrote what. But really, each one of us was who he was. And although we shared a lot of things stylistically and at certain times, we remained different because we were different people, and we were all incredibly hard-headed people, stubborn pricks who figured that he was right. Although Joe was a nice one of the group, the rest of us, and Dick was very laid back, but we were all in our own. But even Joe, who was very mild man, incredibly mild mannered, deep down he was a stubborn guy. He knew he stuck to his guns. And so during those earlier times when we were nobodies, we were in the trenches together, let's put it that way, or something. And it never went away, and it never has gone away from me. I mean, I'm the only one left alive now of those four, and of us four. And it was a wonderful stroke of luck, certainly on my part, to have met and to have known and had it as friends, those Ted and Dick and Joe. I mean, how lucky can you get? You're in Tulsa and you meet these people and you form these lifelong friendships that, oh man, can't beat it.
Yeah, thanks. Can I ask you one more thing?
Sure thing.
This is sort of a three-part question from Guillaume Coletti. And the question is, have you finally found your voice? Where was it hiding all that time? Was it on a fishing boat?
Fishing boat? No, not on a fishing boat. I don't know about that third part there. Oh, he's referring to a poem of mine in which I try to make fun of the idea of that you have to find your voice as a writer, you know. And I hated being told that. I've always hated being told that. In fact, I've always been hated being told to do anything in writing. But I don't know where I said this. I'm probably repeating myself too much, but in terms of the writer finding his or her voice, don't worry about finding your voice. If you have one, it will find you. And I've come to that conclusion. Yeah, I think I did it because I was looking through when Coffee House Press published this collection of my big thing, collected poems, and I was forced to look at a bunch of poems over a very long period of time, in which I had strenuously avoided sounding like myself as much as possible, and because I didn't want to be trapped in a voice. And then I looked and I realized there is a voice here. I never realized it was there till now. And so anyway, that's a kind of a huffy answer to John Coletti's question, but I hope it tells him what he wants to know.
Well, he's here. He's nodding. I think he's playing hooky from work.
Good.
My brother sent me these ridiculous questions like, what is the future of now? What have we when the majesty of the moment wisps? What have we when the majesty of the moment wisps? And have you unpacked the resonance? But I think I'll say those questions, but they don't need to be answered.
Oh no, I'm dying to answer them. No.
Have you unpacked the resonance?
No, I haven't unpacked anything, but please tell your wonderful brother that I will. I think that medical assistance will be of great use to him, and I will call up a guy I know in New York to get him an appointment. No, your brother's a genius. Actually, he is.
Well, thanks so much, Ron. And we end these things by letting everybody sort of throwing open the mic so everyone can say hello and goodbye. Oh. And I know the chat, I hear the chat is something that drives you up the wall, but the chat has been filled with love during the reading.
Oh, that's nice. Well, thank you, everybody. I took a sneak peek at the names of the people who were signing in, and I'm not going to go down all the names, but it was wonderful to see. No, really, seriously.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Ron.
Love you
Hi.
all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ron.
Bye.
Have a-
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Anselm and Ron.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ron.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you so much.
Morocco starts in 1 minute.